Hi there, welcome back to this channel. So in this video, we're going to solve problems on function. So I have a problem here, which is find the range of the following polynomial functions. Find the range of the following polynomial functions. So if this is the first time being on this channel, kindly subscribe and also please visit the polynomial function section so you understand what polynomial functions are and how you go about with the domain and range. But in this video, we're going to specifically take the range of this function given. Please watch the video to the end, right? So you take the functions one by one and analyze the range. So when I take the first one, f of x is equal to x squared plus 6. When we want to find the range of any polynomial function, as I said in the previous video, you need to get a domain. You need to get a domain, right? So you realize that range is simply the output of what a function. It's a successful output of a function. So range is the successful output. And you have what you call codomain. The codomain is what the possible output. So the range is simply dependent on what the domain. Depending on what you feed into the function, that is what will determine what the output will be, right? So codomain is just the possible output, but range is simply the particular domain you fed into the what function. Now, codomain and range becomes equal, right? When you are not giving any initial domain. So without any initial domain, you have to find all the possible domain as your range, as your codomain, right? So always, if the question doesn't give an initial domain, then you have to find a general domain so that you use that to guide you to find a range. But if it gives you an initial domain, just valid over some few set of values, then your range will be restricted to that domain. So now let's apply that to the problem we have here, right? So let's solve this question here. So it says f of x is equal to x squared plus 6. We weren't given any initial domain, and you know that for polynomial functions, their domain is what? Set of all real numbers. Or you say that negative infinity to positive infinity, right? So to find the range is simply the output of this function after I have put in this my domain. When I put this my domain, you realize that the function here is x squared. When I put the negative infinity into it, right, what am I getting? I'm getting what? Negative infinity all squared plus 6. This will make it what? Positive, right? And I'm going to get negative infinity plus 6, and this was also still what? Positive infinity. When I put the positive infinity, I'll get what? Positive infinity all squared, right? Then plus 6 is still positive infinity. So meaning that the minimum value this function can get is when s is equal to 0. When s is equal to 0. Aside that, it's going to span from when s equals 0. So let's see. When I put s equals 0, I'm going to get what? 6. Is that not it? So for s equals 0. And remember that any negative number I put here, because this is squared, it's an even function here, it will square it, right? And it will make it positive. So therefore, my range will have the lowest number to be what? 6, right? So have the lowest to be what? 6, and the maximum to be what? Positive infinity. That's all. So this becomes our range. To have the lowest to be 6 because everything you put here becomes positive. So we are only having the lowest x input to be 0, and that will yield a range of 6 to positive infinity. And that is for the first one. So let's go to the B and solve that as well. Let's go to the B and solve that as well. So for the B part, we are having f of x is equal to negative 2x to the power 4 minus 6, right? So for this function here, this is not an even function because the x to the power 4 is being multiplied by a negative number. Okay, it's being multiplied by a negative number. Since we aren't given any initial domain, the domain becomes what a set of all real numbers because we are dealing with polynomial function, a set of all real numbers, which is negative infinity to positive infinity, right? So now, when I put negative infinity here, though the power 4 will make it positive, but the negative here will still make it negative again, right? So meaning that our lowest input will be what? Negative infinity, infinite negative infinity. And the range will still produce what? A negative infinity as the output for that, right? Then also when I put a positive infinity here, I'm going to get what? The positive infinity, x to the power 4, when I put, I'll get negative 2 multiplying what? Positive infinity all to the power 4. Is that not it? Here too, the positive infinity will be made what? Will be made negative by this negative sign. So meaning that there is no way we can get the positive infinity. So now let's see, do we have values of x that when we put into this function, you get positive answer? That is the next thing to ask yourself. Because we know that the minimum this function can produce is what? Negative infinity. Do you have possible values of x that when you put in here? Because for every value of x you put here, the x to the power 4 will make that value what? Positive, right? But this negative here will then in turn negate it and it will make it negative. So all the time we are producing negative outputs. Take note, all the time this section will give us a negative result all the time, then as well as minus 6. So obviously you can see that we are going to have what? Negative. And for a point like x equals 0, when I put 0 here, this place will be 0 and I also have negative 6. So meaning that this function was spanned from what? Negative infinity only, right? Negative infinity only. So this one we say that the range is simply giving us a set of negative real numbers. You just write r minus, okay, r minus. So a set of what? Negative real numbers, because this function will produce only negative numbers. So a set of negative real numbers. So if you want to write it in an interval form, you say that the highest this function can go will be what? 0. The highest this function can go, because it's going to yield this is negative 6, and when I put 0 here, it will go, this whole thing becomes 0 and I have negative 6, right? But let's see. Yes, so meaning that if I put in 0, I'm getting negative 6 as what? Minimum. But I can still have numbers which are input which are far less than 0, and it will still happen to be what? Negative infinity. So obviously our range is simply giving us negative real numbers, which is represented as such r minus, r minus, r minus. And when you talk about a range which is r minus, r minus is simply starting from what? Negative infinity, and the maximum it can go is 0. For r minus, it's starting from negative infinity, okay, and the maximum it can go is what? 0, right? But with this particular function, the maximum I think it can take should be negative 6, because assuming that this turns 0, assuming that this whole side turns 0, then our 6 here will be what? Will be the maximum negative number this will attain, right? Will be the maximum negative number this will attain. So we can still bring this 6 here and make it from negative infinity towards to negative 6, to negative 6 inclusive, right? So negative infinity to negative 6 inclusive, or else you can also write negative real numbers. So let me give you the C. For the C, I have f of x is equal to negative 2x cubed plus 1, right? I have f of s equals negative 2x cubed plus 1. So this one too, my domain is simply what? A set of what? Real numbers r, right? which is negative infinity, then positive infinity. So what is the range of this function? The range. Now this function is an odd function, right? So the x can take an odd input, and when it takes an odd input, it will give what? When it takes a negative number, it will bring out a negative solution because the cube of a negative number is still negative, right? And it has a negative 2 here. So the negative sign will make that positive, right? The negative sign will make that positive. So you realize that all negative numbers you put into this function will yield what? Positive what? Values. And all positive values you put into this function will surely yield negative values, right? Will surely yield negative values. So with this, our range is simply what? A set of all real numbers, because you can have a set of negative input, a set of negative output, right? Whenever we put in positive numbers. So when you put in 1, 2, on 3 or 4, you are getting what? Negative output, right? You are getting negative output. And when I put in negative output, I'm getting what? Positive, right? So the maximum positive I'll get is what? Positive infinity, and the minimum negative I'll get is what? Negative infinity. So we just say that the range spans from what? Negative infinity to positive infinity. Negative infinity to positive infinity, right? Negative infinity to positive infinity. So let's see, I want to make some correction here. So you realize that in this part, we always want the maximum and the minimum. That's why you see a range, right? It's an interval from the least towards the highest, right? So here you just ask yourself, what's the least you ever get? It's negative infinity, right? Then what is the maximum you can ever get here? So the maximum you can ever get here can be the highest negative number, right? So assuming that you have x here to be 1, you are getting negative 8. Yeah, so I just want to make this clarification to you that always look out for what? The largest and what? So the lowest, and this one is what? The largest, and that will be a guidance when you are finding what? Your range. Okay, so you just ask yourself, what will be the least number I can get out of here? And that will be negative infinity. And what will be the highest number I can get out of here? The highest, I mean the biggest, right? So that one too is what? Negative 6 here. So I just wanted you to get that understanding here. So D, f of x is equal to absolute of negative 2 x cubed plus 1. Here, whenever you see an absolute of a polynomial function, you simply say that the range will yield what? It will yield 0 towards positive infinity, right? Just don't stress yourself. This is because whatever you put into this function is giving us what? Positive number, right? It's giving us a positive number. And for that reason, the lowest it can ever get is what? 0. And the maximum is what? Positive infinity. Now let's go to E. E says f of x is equal to 3 minus 4x for the domain giving us what? Negative 2 open, 8 closed. Negative 2 open, 8 closed. So for this one, we've been given a specified domain, so we only have to put this domain inside it straight away. So when I put negative 2, what am I getting? 3 minus 4 multiplying negative 2, and this will give me what? 3 plus 8 giving me 11. So the least range I'll ever get, so I'll just write my range is equal to, the least I'll ever get is what? 11, right? And it's open because the input here is not included, it's open, comma. The highest I'll ever get, I'll put 8 inside. So 8 for 32. Oh, sorry. Sometimes you have to put the output down before you classify whether it's the least or what? The maximum. Yeah, so the first one, you put the negative 2 inside, you are getting what? 11, right? Then when you put 8 inside, you are getting 3 minus. When you put the 8 inside, you are getting 3 minus 4 times what? 8. Is that not it? So 3 minus negative 3 minus 32. So 3 minus 32. What are you getting? Negative 29, right? Negative 29. So meaning that when you compare our range, you have 11 and negative 29. So our range will take the minimum to be what? Negative 29. Remember 8 was closed, so you bring your close, negative 29, comma, the negative 2 was open, so 11 open. And this is simply the range of our function when a domain is given. You simply have to put in the largest and the biggest values in your domain. That's all. So let's see the last question here, which is which is F, right? F. So our F says that f of x is equal to 2x minus 1 all squared plus 1 over the domain of f, which is given as negative infinity to negative 1 union 1 comma positive infinity, right? So here, as I said, we've been given what a domain, so you simply have to apply the domain here. So in our domain, it starts from negative infinity to negative 1, then as after it continues again from positive 1 to negative infinity. So these are two separate intervals, from 1 forward and from negative 1 away. Okay, so what will be the output of this function given this interval? What will be the output of this function given this interval? So our range. So for the range of this function, let's see, if I put in negative infinity here, because of this squared, right, whatever will come out of this side, whatever will come out from this side of the manipulation here, this side of the manipulation will be positive, right? Then after you add another positive one to it. So we should expect this function to be producing only positive output, right? Only positive output. So meaning that our range will have the maximum output to be what? Positive infinity. Open. Now what about the minimum? What will be the minimum value of this? The least number this range can ever get. So let's see if this is the domain, right? For the domain, we don't have any zero in the domain. Take note. The domain starts from negative infinity towards negative 1. And it also starts again from 1 to infinity, meaning there is nothing like 0 here, right? So we can only put negative 1 as well as 1 in order for us to determine our least number, right? So when I put negative 1 here, what am I getting? 2 open brackets negative 1 minus 1. This is what? Negative 2 minus 1, which is the same as what? Negative 3 squared. And that is giving me what? 9, positive 9. That is when I put negative 1. But when I put positive 1 is giving me what? 2 multiplied by 1 minus 1. And that is what? 1 squared, and is what? 1. So we can then see that the least output to be what? 1. Okay? So it will be 1. So our range is simply starting from what? 1 towards positive infinity, not 9. Because 9 will be covered in with the positive infinity here. And this is the end of this video. Thank you for being with me and watching the video. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.